So, good morning and welcome to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and years virtually.
We're coming to you from gardenatozz.org. I'm Janet Makanovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola.
And we're talking about getting the garden ready for spring. That's me. And those are my suspenders. That means I'm going out, indeed.
Indeed. And that's me. That doesn't mean anything other than I'm wearing pants with red on it.
And our co-host is our daughter, Sonia Nicola, who's there with our granddaughter, Elizabeth. Sonia is a good gardener, a great gardener in her own right, has been all of her life since she's been telling us what to plant where.
Yeah.
And she is also a professor at the University of Toronto, where they've been teaching virtually for well over a year now, and is very good at helping with the technical problems. So should you have technical problems or gardening problems, you put those into chat, and we have somebody who can take care of those things for us.
Some technical problems. None of us can do.
We've been writing about gardening for a long time. A few years after we started gardening professionally and started writing books, we got a lot of letters and a lot of email from people through our column in the Detroit News for 13 years and writing for Michigan Gardener for 10 years. And what we learned from questions from people is that we knew nothing. You know nothing, Janet and Steve. There's so much going on out there that you don't know about. It made us look into a lot of things. It made us find out a lot of things. It told us a lot of things, and we decided we needed to share that with people. So we write about it on our website, gardenatozz.org, and we're hoping that you know what's there, or that you're going to keep joining us at webinars, maybe subscribe to our webinars coming up for this next year. The whole idea about today is start sooner. If
you didn't start last fall.
Start sooner, work smarter. It makes the whole season easier and prettier. It really does. So we want you to get out there today. And that means that we need to know what your questions are. So we're going to let them guide the flow. That's the note-taking outline. You can download at our website or go into chat right now. You'll find a link at the top of the chat. Or if there's been a lot going on, Sonia will drop it in again. There's also a lot of information. This is what Caring for Perennials, our book, is all about. It's what to do and when to do it in the garden. And it starts out with what we do in the spring, and then it moves to what we do the next time we come to visit. And it follows a real garden through that whole process. There'll be a bunch of pictures from that garden today and from other gardens. But we are going to use the outline. We are going to go through, because this is what keeps me sane and solves anxiety attacks out in the garden.
It really does make a difference.
When Sonia and I were talking this week, and she said something about how there's so much to do out there, and I told her always, ever since I first started gardening, and ever since every day that I go out right now, in the springtime, I stand and look at the garden and go, oh my gosh, it's too much to do. I can't. What do? I can't get this all done. And I have learned that if I start with number one, say just do that first,
Prune the woodies,
then cut down last year's debris, then rake, then get some fertilizer if you've got it and spread it, then edge the bed, then worry about those weeds inside the bed, then worry about dividing things. After that, you can make some moves and replace things. Then when that's all done, you can put mulch on it. This process helps me say, get something done, be productive, get to the place where I can put out those cool season annuals like the pansies and whatever. And if I record things that are done, then I've got it made.
And you could do this in small sections. You don't have to say the whole garden, I'm going to do all the woodies first. You could do 100 square foot section and stay in that section and finish, if that's the way you'd like to work.
So we're going to jump around in questions. We'll go where you want us to go, but know that you have this outline because it's our sanity saver and our best direction to you for what to do first and second and third in the garden in order to keep things moving along. So go ahead. What questions do you have?
All right. So just a couple holdovers from right before we hit go. Michelle says, do you think the white blooming tree that's out right now, is it escaped pear or wild apple? It's out along the roadsides, not planted.
Yeah, they're escaped pears. They're calorie pears. Calorie pear in its clone, the Bradford pear, was the new marvel tree during the period of replacing elms that were lost to Dutch elm blight. And we thought, well, it's a perfect tree. It grows well in for cities. It can handle cramped root space. It's pretty. It doesn't smell too good when it blooms, but it's pretty, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a great tree for a while until, maybe 15 to 20 years into planting a million Bradford pears, all the same clone. It became clear that they didn't have good wood, that they were
weren't
weak
sterile.
wood, and they were weak wood and they would split apart. So other varieties of calorie pear like Chanticleer and White House and Sentinel and Aristocrat, they all started getting planted. And now we found out it's not a sterile tree, that Bradford was not producing fruit because there were no other varieties around. But just like apple trees, once we got a second variety and pollen they've been spreading everywhere. They are worse.
They're in the woods. They're really getting bad.
They're worse than buckthorn. If you go down south, right, actually about 2 weeks ago, if you went down south and you drove through Kentucky and into West Virginia, the hillsides are full of them. So they're not a good tree, and that is what you're seeing. And I'm glad that you asked about that.
Yeah, great.
There are some wild cherries and service berries that are out there in bloom too, but you can tell the Bradford, it's a denser flower.
Yeah, and Linda's saying that she has a Juneberry, a service berry that's blooming right now. So do we. And
Yeah.
when you look in, since those will grow in the shade, if you go past a native woods here and you look in underneath the other trees and there's a light bloom going on all over, it's probably the service berries. They're beautiful trees.
Great. Anne is saying, did I just see a picture of a grub as I was logging in? I found 2 and raking, if that's what it was. What's the best thing to do about them? She has a new 2-year-old lawn with irrigation. I'm assuming, Steve, if you want to recap your little friend, the cutworm.
Well, that was a cutworm, that picture that you particularly saw at the beginning.
Yeah. That guy right there.
That guy right there.
Not a grub. It's a cutworm. It's a caterpillar.
It eats the grass, and we don't have the series, but it burrowed into that little piece of sod. It flipped itself over and burrowed into that sod in about 2 minutes, and I've got a series of pictures of it doing it.
This is not a grub, though. Grubs eat the roots of plants. These guys hide in the grass or just below the surface, and then they climb up, usually early in the day, late in the day, not times you don't notice, and they wrap themselves around, just like you see it curled there. It'll wrap itself around the base of, say, your new bean plant that just sprouted, or your new peanut that just sprouted, or your squash that just sprouted. Wrap itself around and eat it. And you'll come out and there are all your new plants laying over dead because this guy chewed the bottoms of them off. Doesn't do nearly as much trouble, as much damage as grubs do, but there appear to be quite a few of them in our area this year. It's just a caterpillar. It's a moth that lays the eggs.
This is his underside. He has a darker top. Anyway,
they all have darker sides.
Yeah.
Yep. So Anne's asking, is this the grub? And I do the same thing. If it looks a little bit kind of, rolly and grubby, I call it grub. Is this what you have at this time of year? I see both cutworms and actual grubs as I'm edging. So it could be either. If it's that green color, it's probably the cutworm.
Yeah, it's a cutworm. And just so that you can let you know, we were going to make sure that you knew right now that it is not the time to deal with lawn grubs. It might be the time when you see grubs, but it is very difficult to kill the grubs that bother lawn now. They are almost fully mature larvae. They're going to pupate almost any time, which means they're not eating very much, and they're big and tough. They're hard to kill without tons of poison to kill them. I mean, you've got to really lay that stuff.
And timing has to be just right.
Right. So it's not a good time to kill the grubs. The time to kill grubs is when they're babies. Sad to say, we gardeners need to all learn that the easiest thing to kill are babies. And those grubs are going to be babies in August and September and October. So if you think you have a serious lawn problem with grubs, then the time to deal with them is in the late summer, to put something that will kill them as they grow. But make sure you actually have grubs responsible for dead patches. Tug on the grass blades. If grubs are killing your grass, they'll literally pull up. And then, okay, maybe you've got it. But most of the time people see dead patches and they see a grub here or there and they go, oh, the grubs have done that.
Yeah.
No, most of the time dead patches are because your lawn got weak. It needs to be aerated or fertilized or watered better, or you need to get the weeds out.
Or not mowed as short.
Yeah. If you are if you are a turf manager at, say, a golf course, you're going to actually count your grubs. You're going to dig squares of sod out in several places and look to see if you have more than 8 or 9 grubs per foot. If you've got more than 8 or 9 grubs per foot, you might have some damage to the grass if you don't water it well. So don't believe this stuff that they tell us about grubs, and everybody in the world is dumping all kinds of stuff on the lawns at this time of year, most of which is not doing anything.
Yeah, and they're
polluting.
putting crabgrass killer on. The soil's not warm enough for the crabgrass to be sprouting yet, and it only lasts a week to 10 days in the soil. It's yeah.
So we've got continued conversation about this. What about, as Lily is asking, what about grubs in a vegetable garden?
Grubs in a vegetable garden are not, right now, they're doing very little of anything. I mean, you don't, unless you've got a lot of perennial vegetables, and I have to think about which ones, maybe asparagus they might be eating. And if you do, I would be doing what an organic gardener would be doing, or farmer would be doing. I would be opening up the soil, slicing some openings in the soil to make it easier for the birds to get in.
The birds will get them.
And the skunks, people get all upset about skunks. There's a skunk digging in my lawn. Let them dig. They're very good at getting grubs out, and skunks are very meticulous. They will move into an area where they smell grubs, and they will dig every grub out of that area.
You actually look like somebody took a shotgun from above and hit it. And
they do it at 2 a.m. So it's not like you're going to walk out into your garden and work and a skunk is going to be there taking precedence.
And unless they squirted something recently, you're not going to smell them.
Yeah. I would love to see that posted on Facebook pages, that page, and I can send, let's see, we can send that to people, or we can go back to that page for a minute and you can take a picture of it on the lawn grubs page. If you capture your screen right now, I do it with command buttons on the keyboard. I'm not sure how you do it, but if you can capture that screen, then you can post it on your Facebook page. Let's see, we'll do this here. We'll capture it ourselves. There we go. So I have now captured that screen, and if you can't capture it, then I've got it to send it to you, and you can send me an email to say I couldn't get it.
Great.
Sorry.
And just also as a follow-up, Nancy was curious about what the adults look like. You don't happen to have a picture for that, do you?
Of the grubs?
Well,
yeah, grubs or cutworms. I'm not sure when it came in.
Oh, the cutworm moth is one of those brown closed winged moths that you don't really notice very much. It's got a narrow, but I don't have a picture of it. It's a narrow body. The wings fold up. They fold up like an accordion pleat. So most people don't even recognize it as a moth. Grubs is another matter.
Grubs are all beetles.
Yeah, they're all beetles. They're chafers or June bugs, or there's Japanese beetles. Yeah, there's all kinds of beetles that they could be.
Yeah, I see the Japanese beetles grubs a fair bit. All right, so while we're on the subject of the lawn, Robin is saying daughter has moles in her yard. Any solution? And does that mean she has grubs? So who's eating the grubs?
The moles will eat grubs. They'll eat worms. They'll eat grubs. They'll eat anything organic that they can find. So they're doing that job for us.
They do tend to be attracted into lawns with a lot of grubs because it is food for them.
Right, they're going to come where there's food, but it's not true that if you get rid of the grubs, you'll get rid of the moles. The moles use the territory. If there's no grubs in your yard, they're still going to tunnel through your yard. One mole can cover a 1/4 acre without any problem, doing a lot of digging back and forth. If you've got moles and they're a problem because they make it too hard for you to walk on the lawn, then you need to put traps out. That's really the only way to do it. People tell me all kinds of things about, I put out chewing gum with poison in it. What we've read and we've talked to people who specialize in moles, the best thing that you can do is to put out a trap. Quite often those little worms that have poison in it, or the poison baits that you put in the gum, the moles will take and squirrel away. They have a larder that they put stuff into it, so it's not likely to kill them.
Not just that, if something eats the mold, then it eats the poison.
Yeah, and the time to do moles is now. Like many of the animals, we're about ready to see the explosion of new new animals coming out. And if you want to keep your mole numbers down, then trap them early in the year. And what you do is just exactly what it says in all of the pest control books. You're going to go out and you're going to walk over the tunnels and pack them down and see if they are pushed back up the next day, because where you want to put a trap is in the tunnels that are used every day. And there are runways that they use, and off the runways, there'll be branch feeder routes going to where they smell worms or where they smell grubs. And what you want to put the trap in is one of those regular routes, because they go through them every day and they are very, very clean animal. They clean up cave-ins on their tunnels all the time. So if you take a square of sod out of one of those main tunnels and set your trap in, and you can tell you're in the tunnel. You take the sod out, and then you can put your fingers on either side. There's a little tunnel going off to the side. Put your trap down level with the tunnel, take the piece of sod and put it around the top of the trap so that it's dark. And the mole will come along, clearing the trap, clearing the cave-in that you made by digging that stuff out. And as they clear it, they set the trap and get killed in it. And that's really what you need to do. That, or you need to put your lawn chair out. What did one guy say? Set out a lawn chair, get a can of beer, put your spade next to you,
And wait.
And wait, and you'll see them, and you can see the ground moving when they go by, and you can literally take your shovel and hit just behind where you see the soil popping up, and you can kill them. I've killed them with my foot doing that. I didn't mean to. I was just telling people what they could do, because I don't want to kill moles.
And if you back up to woods or other areas where there's more moles, it's almost a losing battle.
Yeah.
Quickly, I think this isn't a problem, but Gwyn is wondering if mole traps are a threat to cats. I don't think so.
It shouldn't be. The actual kill mechanism is below ground, and the spray on that thing is amazingly strong. It's pretty hard to set it off. So either it's a harpoon type or it's a noose type that pulls up, and both of those would be below the ground. Now, if you got a really inquisitive cat that's pawing and digging in it, maybe, but I don't think so.
Doesn't seem likely. And I think Ruth's response is actually in a way responding to Mark. Mark was saying that they had lots of voles last year that ate many perennials and annuals. It's now time to set out traps, even though I don't see any holes yet. And Ruth says, maybe let's stop trying to kill everything. If you're not seeing the problem, maybe assume that it's not going to be a big vole year. Our garden has been, I know, back and forth. Some years, lots of voles, some years not. So maybe response rather than proactive with killing.
It's all cyclical.
It is true. The farmers call it a mouse year. You get times when there are a lot of voles, and when there are a lot of voles, you will see the holes already in April when you go out there. Holes are about as big around as a quarter, and they're usually toward the base of plants. And you'll have things like grasses that you can pull up out of the ground, because the voles, which are relatives of mice, they are not moles, they're voles with a V. They have eaten the crowns just below ground. You'll also see in the lawn serpentine kinds of paths where the voles have been chewing the crowns of grass underneath the snow. If you're seeing the holes now and the tunnels, then chances are that it's heading up to a mouse year, and you could have 100 voles by August. In which case, yes, set out traps, mouse traps with peanut butter, covered with a box on top of the hole to keep it dark. Will generally catch a vole, but don't do it unless you need to do it.
One year here, we took pictures of our lawn of the vole things, and we haven't seen anything like that since.
No,
and we don't see any holes out in our lawn other than we do have a
fox that patrols regularly,
yes.
And we're very glad to have that. And you do want to know that peanut butter will catch almost anything. We've had peanut butter. We've had garter snakes caught in traps with peanut butter. We're not sure if they were chasing the mouse that got away or whether even garter snakes like peanut butter. But be careful about killing stuff here. That's very good, Ruth. Voles don't like castor oil. Moles are repelled by the smell of castor plant roots, and so there is a product called Mole Out. That's not what it's called. There's a product that's made from castor oil that you put on the soil and water it in to make the soil smell like castor, and that's supposed to keep moles out. We've heard varying reports from people. It's kind of a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
All right.
So
what does Steven's shirt say?
Oh, grassroots ponds and gardens. Pond and garden.
Grassroots Nursery in New Boston,
Well,
one of our
Pond and
favorite
garden.
places to go
Yeah.
for water gardens and for just wonderful advice. And they're building a butterfly house.
He's building a butterfly house
It's in
now,
New Boston,
so.
down in the south part of the Detroit
Exit
area.
11 off of I-275.
And I was actually going to stick with some of the grass and lawn questions that are coming in. Judith is curious: is now the time to spring seed the lawn? And a couple of weeks ago, you recommend mixing in white clover with grass seed. Is micro clover or mini clover equally advisable?
I'm not familiar with micro clover or mini clover. I'm assuming that it is another species of clover or even a variant of the Dutch clover that somebody picked for smaller leaves because that smaller leaf texture would look better in the lawn. And I would say go for it. And yes, it is a good time to overseed right now. I'm watching right now a bare spot that I dug up in January. It was January, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was so warm, and I took out a weed grass that was in our grass, and so it left a bare spot about arm's hand around, and I've seeded it, and it's just beginning to sprout. So now it's a good time.
core aeration and top seeding isn't bad. Top dressing, I mean.
Diane caught a song sparrow in the mousetrap years ago.
Yep.
Yep.
It happens,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
All right, let's see, what else do I have? All right, moving from grass to ground cover. Linda is curious about how you control the size of a bed of ground cover that wants to keep spreading.
With edging around it and have the ground cover only in a bed by itself, not in your perennial bed. So the only way we keep ground cover from spreading is we define an edge between it and the grass around it, or it and the garden near it. We don't put ground cover in where a bed is. The newsletter we've been working on, and we will send out, is about getting rid of a ground cover type plant that shouldn't have been put in with perennials, because it's a lot of work to get it out. So we establish an edge and treat that edge as inviolate, that every year we keep the lawn on one side and the ground cover on the other side. If the ground cover is adjacent to a perennial bed, same thing, we have an edge.
There's got to be a division.
And usually
otherwise.
a no plant zone between the ground cover and the perennial bed.
That's where you put your maintenance path.
That's
or
right.
Where you something.
Right, where we allow nothing to grow. No better help for you than that.
Okay. Oh, sorry, we do have one other grass question that came in toward the end. Roberta says we have tiny moths in midsummer about the time the patches appear in the grass. Any idea what they are? They fly up when you mow. I thought this is what laid eggs. Would those be?
Sod webworm does that, and they do. They hide in the grass and then they flutter up. They're little bitty moths.
Yeah, real tiny.
And they're laying eggs that their caterpillars, which are much smaller than the cutworm caterpillars, their caterpillars eat individual crowns of grass, the base of the grass roots. If you've got a lot of them, they can cause some dead patches in the lawn, but you have to have a lot of them to do that. And if you see them flying, at about that time you see them flying, that would be the time that if you wanted to use something that was an insecticide to kill the caterpillars, you'd put that on the ground. And there's, for instance, neem oil that you can put on. That's a fairly innocuous thing to do that affects only the insects, not the other animals that might be using the lawn.
Okay. While we're in the soil, Barbara says, have you mentioned jumping worms in the past? They're invasive earthworms from Asia. They're very efficient eaters of leaves on the ground, which are negatively affecting the woods. Do you suggest we kill them if found or let them be? I understand the adults die in the winter, but their eggs survive.
You've covered it entirely, everything that we know about it. I may have seen them. I've certainly seen worms that wiggle around vigorously, and I've seen them for many years. So I don't know if I've been seeing jumping worms or other worms, but I have read that they're a problem. So are night crawlers a problem.
Yeah.
Can you kill them? Or should you kill them? What we're told is if you think that you have jumping worms in your yard, do not move plants from your yard to another yard, because you don't want to move them elsewhere. And yes, they don't live through the winter, but the eggs can survive and come back next year. Anything that eats ground cover, as in litter that falls on the ground so rapidly that it now doesn't provide protection for the native plant seedlings that are trying to come up, can be a problem. And like I say, night crawlers, which are not native to North America, they're not Canadian night crawlers, they're Eurasian night crawlers. They do the same things in the woods.
And now we, took years for us to realize that they were causing problems in the woods. Fishermen would take, at the end of the day, just throw their worms into the woods, or
figuring they were doing the right
figuring
thing.
they were doing the right thing, and finding out, no, it's better to throw them in the water, let the fish eat them, or take them, but
Yeah. I see people talking about lawn grass and seeding in bare areas. Lawn seed can do strange things to you. It can sit there until conditions are just right, and just when you think, well, I'll put a garden there instead, grass seed will come up all over.
We reseeded the lawn 18 months ago, and it's now just starting to sprout in some spots.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Funny how that can happen.
Yeah.
We have some questions about the conditions for getting out there right now. So, for instance, Gretchen says, this week I've thought it was too wet to be in the garden. The gardens are wet, the lawn is soggy. Comments about things being wet. Do the friability test?
Yes, we can do the friability test, or we can make sure that we don't compact the soil another way. Here's Sonia. 1 foot on the soil, this pressure right here, you standing on 1 foot, you small person like us, that's more pressure per square inch than a bulldozer on the soil. And if the soil is wet, it squeezes down and it doesn't fluff back up again.
It pushes the air and the water out.
Right, it forms kind of a suction as it closes. So Sonia's wearing snowshoes, spreading her weight out. If the soil is too wet, which means, and I don't have a picture of getting a handful of soil, get a handful of soil, squeeze it in your hand, open your hand. If you then can knock that soil and it knocks apart pretty easily, then you're fine. If it won't knock apart, or if water squeezes out of it, get some boards to put on the ground so that you're spreading your weight out like snowshoes, or wear snowshoes,
or wait,
or wait. Otherwise, it's fine, and it has been fine this spring in most of the places where we work. There's only 1 yard.
Been very wet.
Yeah, there's only 1 yard I can say that no, okay, I shouldn't be out here. This is still too wet, and you could tell that it was squishy.
Our yard is too sandy ourselves.
Yeah, too
and
sandy.
do remember for your own health that if it is damp out there, that you might chill faster if it's still not very warm. So make sure you put an extra layer on, even if it seems right away that you don't need it. If you start getting damp, you don't want to chill down and hurt yourself.
Yesterday, I went out to take pictures, and in the morning, I didn't put on my long johns. It's spring. I don't need long johns, and I was cold. I had the long johns on the rest of the day.
Yeah, it's called exposure, guys, and it does happen to us. That suddenly you start shaking, and then it's too late.
Yeah, hard to take pictures when your hands are.
Other condition questions. Linda says, during the upcoming freeze Tuesday, Wednesday, are there any perennials that are up that should be covered?
No. If they are up, they can take it. If they get killed back somewhat, it's not going to be a big problem.
If they're up in the nursery pots and that, or if you just planted them from a nursery that they were up, yes, you could be in.
Yeah, we learned
they're way too early at the nurseries right now.
We learned an interesting thing about daylilies here when we were doing the perennial book. Just because it was easier to cut the whole daylily than to individually grab last year's stems that were still sticking up and cut out. Half of the daylilies, there's 3 right here in this garden, half of the daylilies, 3 or 4 of them, I just cut them all the way down to the ground. I just did it the easy way, just cut the whole thing. The other bunch of daylilies, I carefully took the pieces out and left the leaves there. The ones that I was so careful with at this point in the year, and this was the 1st of April before more freezes were coming, the ones that I was so careful with and left the leaves ended up with a lot of leaf spot that year. And that's because those leaves had gotten damaged by the frost. They didn't die, but they got damaged by the frost and then grew up and had some pinpoint infections on them, which spread. So the plants can take it. And if they can't take it, if they get hurt, cut them, just cut them back. And there, by the way, is a fescue that needs to be, that's a blue fescue, Elijah Blue, that's been too long, 5 years without being divided. And I picked it up and sliced those in half and put them in just the way they are. I combed out the dead grass and stuck them back in, and those were just great.
Yeah. Lizzie says this year all the leaves on the gardens became wet and compacted. It's still rainy, they're not drying. Should I sadly remove them?
I would fluff them up, but you're definitely not going to have to remove them. If it's been wet and it's cold out there, then the plants aren't growing yet. Give it some time for both the leaves to get a little drier and the plants to start growing. And then when you see the plants trying to come up and maybe they can't, maybe the leaves are still matted, take your rake and shake those loose, but I wouldn't take them all out. Okay. It is hard this time of year to wait that last little bit.
It is.
But but the wetter and colder it's been, the slower the development is. And it is only the middle of April, guys. There are things that are still going to come up, and they'll come up without you getting in the middle of the process.
Spring's not even a month old yet.
Yeah. So thinking about cutting, Jackie and Rich, how far can I cut an elderberry bush? Mine is already leafing out. It's tall and gangly.
All the way down.
Yep.
You can cut it right out of the picture. These are butterfly bushes, not elderberries, but same thing. This is those butterfly bushes the next couple of minutes. You see the butterfly bushes there? There's the rocks. And we've changed angles here. DeLacy is now getting ready to take out extra leaves, but all the way down. Now that means with your elderberry, it's probably not going to bloom this year. Never say never with an elderberry, because generally they bloom early enough in the year that that you're taking off the blooming wood. But you can cut it just flush down to the ground. Yeah. And you probably should. Elderberries ought to be cut fairly often, because once the wood gets to be about as big around as a Dixie cup, as a bathroom Dixie cup, it's big enough that borers can complete their life cycle in it, and the borers just get worse and worse on elderberry every year. So
even if you don't want to cut it down to the ground, take 2 or 3 or 4 of the largest canes out anyway,
and saw them down right at ground level, which isn't always easy.
It's easier to take it all down.
Cutting stubble out. This is a client that I said, you can cut the hydrangea all the way to the ground. You can cut it down, and you should. It's a limelight hydrangea. They're trying to keep it small, and it had gotten to be kind of old, and you can see how sticky it's going to be. I came by after they had cut it down, and I went, oh, well, okay, but you guys, you can't do this. If you leave this, every one of these is going to become another little thicket. So you got to get your saw right in there, just like with the elderberry. I've got my saw. I took it in and turned it, and you have to pull it just a little bit at a time until you can get started. And I'm cutting those stubs down harder. That's to the ground. Walk on it, stubs. And that's what you're going to do with your elderberry. And can you see that dark spot in the middle of a hydrangea? That's from dogwood borer, which as this plant got older and older and the stems got bigger and bigger, dogwood borer was moving in. So what you want is to give them nothing to live on. So cut down harder, and it is hard to do. It is not all that easy to get in once you get stubble. So I call
once they're big balls of mass, it's really difficult.
I tell people, no stubble. I don't want stubble. I don't want to come back next year and have to fight my way into the bottom. Cut it all the way down, let it come up clean. Cut it all the way down, let it come up clean.
So just to reinforce, Marie was asking for clarification. My butterfly bush all the way to the ground now. Yes, all the way to the ground now. Cut it down. even if it's sprouting. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It'll come back every year. Because of my teaching schedule, I'm a bit too late getting the butterfly bush in particular. There's always little gray leaves that end up getting cut off. They always come back. Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, Marie, do it today.
Yeah, there's butterfly bush and dwarf spirea.
Dwarf spirea.
Oops, sorry, it went the wrong way. Butterfly bush and dwarf spirea. And here's 75 minutes later, all the spirea and all the butterfly bush gone. Just out of there.
That's cut your partner to the ground.
And here's
if your partner does not.
Yep, go ahead.
If your partner does not walk out after you're done and say, "What did you do?" You probably didn't do it right.
That's right. That's right. And you know who told us that the best was about pruning, was a third generation, and at the time he was about 75, apple grower, who said, if I don't go out in the winter when we're pruning the apples and say, "Oh my God," then they haven't cut them far. And this is a guy who's lived all his life with apples. Here's what Sonia's talking about. Well, if I get into a garden later, here's the spirea coming up. It happens to be a garden where I can't possibly leave it up. It becomes harder to do because I could cut it all the way to the ground, but I wanted to leave something there. So I had to go in and individually clip this, clip this, clip this, clip this to leave some of it.
That's the tedious, boring.
And there it is. There it is 2 weeks later, coming back up, pretty color. There's not room for it to be big in there. So cut it back. Okay.
All right. So just very quickly getting some questions about roses in pruning now. Yep. Cut them down. hydrangea, cut it down now. Basically, a lot of it can go down now.
That's right, cut it down. And with the roses, cut them harder. Let them come from one good shoot down at the base.
Yes.
I don't have pictures of roses being cut back here. Let them come from one good, well-pointed shoot at the base, and give them fertilizer as they start leafing out. If it's a climbing rose, let them come from one, clip back the main cane, and then the side branches, clip them back to one shoot coming off of the side branch. Don't let them get twiggy. You just get smaller flowers, and that's with those ground cover roses too. Cut them back harder, get better growth.
Yep. So Gwyn, you're asking, my hydrangea has buds. Doesn't make sense to cut that back. Cut to above the lowest bud that you can see. Let it come back from that lowest, strongest single bud down there.
And that's if it's a white snowball hydrangea or a panicle hydrangea with the conical clusters. If it's an oak leaf hydrangea, so here's oak leaf hydrangea, you can, if you want to keep the size down, cut the old stems right down to the ground. Let the stuff that's been there last year come up, because it's going to bloom on the older wood. So are the blues and the pinks and the climbing hydrangea, if you're lucky enough to get the blues and the pinks to grow well for you. But so the oak leaf hydrangea and the blues and the pinks and the climbing hydrangea, you can just take some old wood out of them. But the other hydrangeas, this is a panicle hydrangea. See the conical cluster? It's hanging upside down there. The conical clusters. There's no reason to let these branches that are all over the place grow and let this get any bigger than it should. There's actually 3 of them in here in a space where one. Okay. That's what we cut them to, or all the way to the ground. And they look like that when they bloom.
And they don't need to be the massive big plant here.
Yeah, who needs this growth that came out and went around? It's fighting to get through its own shade. We're taking out everything real old. See all the saw marks here, sawdust. We're taking out everything that's quite old. We're taking out everything that went crooked. You can see the one in the back that's still got to be done. See, it's got old thick wood on it that we're going to take out. Do that to them, rather than leave them where they're going to sprout from branches that are just growing in their own shade and twisting around themselves. Sort them out. And the easiest thing to do is to take them all the way to the ground, because they'll still
sort themselves out.
Yeah, they'll still look like that when they bloom. If they're in a good place, these are in a nice place with a lot of sun. The shadier they are, the more you might want to leave some stems up so that they start coming from higher up. But cut those guys harder. Whoops, sorry, wrong topic. Go ahead.
We've got a couple questions about Weigelia. Weigelia as well also goes down.
Yeah, Weigelia goes down, but Weigelia blooms on new wood and old wood. We cut this one all the way down because, well, it's actually tied together with bungee cords when we moved in. I said, what the heck?
You put a 12-foot shrub in a 2-foot section.
Yeah.
Pace.
So I cut it back. I just sawed it all the way back, meaning to dig it out. And it went, oh, you don't really want to dig me out, do you? I went, okay, no, I don't want to dig you out this year. So that's in April of the year that I cut it all the way back. And here it is. This is the end of the year. It had grown up to here, and I cut it back part way. Now what? And now
it's still there, and we're still saying we got to move it.
I got to cut that guy out of there. What happened is it bloomed on these side branches in the late summer. If I want the early summer bloom as well as the late summer bloom, then what I do now is cut old wood out in the spring. So I just reach down to the bottom and I cut about half of these stems right out. The stems that I leave bloom in June. When they bloom, I cut them out. Mm-hmm. The new ones that came up bloom afterwards, because I'm trying to keep Weigelia new wood. It looks nicer on new wood. It stays smaller on new wood, and it blooms prettier on new wood.
And this one is a full-size Weigelia that we're trying to keep to be a dwarf.
Right, until I dig it out of there. Whenever I get around to building
otherwise
around.
it would go completely over the garage door.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Nancy on outline 2-B about how far to cut the deciduous and only its leaves are evergreen, can be raised. Could you explain that point?
Sure, I can. Sure, we can. We'll see what we can do here. Okay, so if I'm cutting back stuff that is evergreen, so I'm going to cut back this Artemisia, which is one of the artemisias that's evergreen. It's an evergreen subshrub. It's Artemisia absinthium. And it's got buds. See them down there? See those little bitty buds? I'm going to cut it all the way back to the base buds, the same as I do a rose. I want it to come from low down because it's going to keep it smaller and fuller. It was quite big enough that it was the reason that the Elijah Blue behind me was dying back. You can almost see where it was laying on top of everything. So I'd like to keep it smaller. So rather than let it stay and grow from the tips of those 12-inch branches that someone left on it in the fall, I cut it all the way back to those. I took out all the weak wood and I cut it all the way back to the first stubs. And here it is 3 weeks later. And here it is 3 weeks after that. And I'm already cutting it where it's laying on other stuff. So I'm cutting them back hard. And I'm doing the same thing with the other evergreen subshrubs. This is sage. Those are pieces I cut out. Old wood, cut the old wood out. What I'm doing is, see the buds down there? I'm cutting to above. So this piece had buds even below that, below the cut that you see at the bottom of the screen. There were buds like that. And I cut to those buds because I'd like to keep it from getting sick. And most of these evergreen subshrubs like lavender and sage are Mediterranean herbs that want to be warm and dry in the summertime. And it's humid and wet in the summertime here. So what they do is they get cracks. Steve, can you point out the crack on the lower left there? See those cracks in the stem right there? That's a fungus infection. And that's from being wet and hot in the summertime when they shouldn't be. And that's only going to get worse as that branch lives a second year on that wounded wood. What you want is new wood coming from the base. So I've cut them all the way back. And can you see this, where it's green all around that sprout? Where I cut it, new shoots are coming. And on lavender, so this is the lavender in the spring, and that's the lavender 5 minutes later.
Down to.
I want to cut it all the way down to those little buds farther down. I don't want to leave stubble like you see on the right. I want to cut it all the way down and let it come from those strong stems.
The stubble makes it's fighting to get out.
Yeah, it's crowding its own self. So here it is. This is October. Here it is the next April. There it is in May after I cut it back in April. There it is in July, blooming after it was cut back in April. And then I just repeat the cycle. Take us back. So yes, with lavender, with sage, with those that, and I hope that explains it. If they are not truly herbaceous, but are little woody subshrubs, what are some of the other ones? Phlox, dianthus, thyme, candy tuft. If you look, they don't die back. They keep coming back from branches that sprawl out on the ground or stand up just above the ground. And so those you just cut back to where there's buds at the base.
Great. Nancy says, totally explained, and thanks so much. Diane asks, if we already cut lavender higher up, can we still take it to the lowest buds now?
Yep. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to go there. Go to 152 then, Stephen. We'll come backwards. Okay. Yes. The one thing you might find, these lavenders hadn't been cut back in a long time. And because the wood had been there a long time and was pretty weak in a lot of places, I dug the lavenders up, took the weeds out that were in there. Whoops. Took the weeds out that were in there and put them back in, leaving them some of that old wood because I was cutting to where there were buds. And I buried some of the branches. I laid them down on the ground and buried them so that they could root and take off. And they did grow up. See, there's green coming from way down at the base and out on the sides. So then the next year I could cut them the way I showed you. But if they haven't been cut in a long time and they've got straggly old wood, you're going to have to do some partial cutting back to let them rejuvenate, to let them grow and get some basal stuff coming, like you see right in the center there.
You want that new growth.
Yeah.
Middle.
All right. So Jocelyn has, I think, a good question, a question that's probably on a lot of people's mind. Is there anything we shouldn't just cut way down? It seems like Janet and Steve are saying just cut to everything. So the woody allowances there, but is there anything that we want to put an asterisk next to?
Yeah, we're not going to cut these, and I've I've told you the way I remember this is PJ Fax, PJFACS, pine, juniper, fir, arborvitae, chamaecyparis or cypress, and spruce. You don't cut those all the way back to the ground because they don't come from buds, from dormant buds. So this spruce, which I'm keeping small, and you will remember I've shown you this picture. I don't remember this picture happening, but I remember cutting the spruce. We would ideally have cut this spruce before things budded out, but you can see everything budding out around here. But you do it when there's time.
Yep.
And it was too big. I cut the top off. There's the top. I've cut the top off, and then I've shortened all the sides. See the string that's coming down the side? It's tied from where I made the new top down at an angle, and I've cut all the branches back so that they end at that point, because I can't just cut it back to bare wood. It won't sprout from bare wood. PJ Fax, pine, juniper, fir, arborvitae, cypress, and spruce. Those you don't cut all the way back. Everything else you
If
can.
it's herbaceous.
Yeah, you can cut it back. Some of the ones that bloom on new wood, like the old-fashioned snowmound spirea and bridal wreath spirea, the big ones that bloom in the spring, the forsythia that blooms in the spring, the crab apples that bloom in the spring. If you cut them, because you need to cut them back for some reason, they're not going to bloom this year. Big deal. They'll grow back. They'll bloom the year after. So there's very few things you don't cut down.
So then just to clarify for those who are asking, lemony lace elderberry, cut it down. Barberry, go ahead and cut it.
Oh, especially lemony lace and barberry. Those are two plants that are growing primarily for foliage effect, and they're going to have better, cleaner foliage, brighter foliage on newer growth. So yeah, barberries we cut all the way down. We put a string around them and tie them tight so you don't have to touch them again, and then use loppers to just cut across the bottom, or a what's that thing called, brush trimmer.
Yeah, the zingy.
Just zing right through it. Yep, cut them down.
Yep. And Jane is asking tips for pruning honeysuckle vine on a trellis, please.
A honeysuckle vine on a trellis, you generally want to cut back like a climbing rose to the main branches that you want to be there, and thin out old stuff and cut side branches back, and then let it be. They'll bloom and they'll do nicely, but you need to leave some of the older wood on a honeysuckle in order to have a really good bloom on it. If it's totally out of control and you need to sort it out to start with, then cut it at the bottom, take the whole thing out, and try to get just 2 or 3 stems going where you want them to go, and make those your main stems.
Great. Rose Sharon, all the way down?
Rosa Sharon can go all the way down, or you can go part way down. Depends on how much you want it to grow. I don't have a picture of the Rosa Sharon. I think we had that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
We have a Rosa Sharon in one garden that, looking at how it grows each year, it only grows about 3 feet a year. It's in the shade. It's an older plant. So we want it to be 5 feet tall. So I cut it down to about 2 feet every year, and take some old wood out every year. And then it grows back up to 5 feet, and then I cut it down.
Yeah, great. And then holly. This is Judith says, can you top it? Can you do it now? She says your guide recommends pruning holly in August.
Right. Holly is like, I was just at the fall cypress there. Holly is like the other, like many of the evergreen plants, that's going to bloom if you're growing it for berries as well as for foliage effect. It's going to bloom on old wood. So you don't want to cut it all the way down and lose all of the flowers on it. You want to just cut it down a little bit. And so August is a great time to prune it. So this fall cypress, which I try not to prune in the springtime, when the response of the plant is to branch out all over the place. We wait until August to keep it small. It's up as far as we want it to go. That's it. And we only want to cut it every 2 years. So you can see that the sedum is budding up. We're getting to be late summer. So I'm going to take the top out. See that the top has now become flattened. I've taken out everything that you see laying on the ground there. I took out the top, and then just like with the string with the spruce, I cut side branches back in order to make that shape come down at an angle from that new top. And then I've taken more out in order to narrow it. And that's the new plant. And you can do the same thing with a holly tree or a holly shrub that's growing on several branches in several directions. Take the top out. So on the right, it's as if this is a whole plant. I've taken the top out and said, okay, now we're going to start from there. And the new top is going to be that little guy right here.
This one.
This
right
one.
there.
This one's going to be the new top right there. So I'm going to have to take out those 2 side branches in order to make the shape come down in a cone, in a pyramid from that new top. And as you do this year by year, you start getting more branching at the top, and you have to take out maybe more at the top, because that's where most of the growth is. So I took out a lot at the top of that plant, and I based it on wanting to do it only every 2 years. So there's the new growth. You can see that the new growth.
This is this year's, the new growth is from the light green.
Once that branch is a year old, it starts getting bark, and you can see it brown there, right about where Steve's waving our little tiny pointer around. Sorry, it's a little tiny today. It's got to be for our jumping around. So I said, okay, it grew that much in 1 year. I need to cut it back to at least twice that far into the plant to make it stay good for 2 years. So that's why it got cut the way you see there. I took a lot out of it, but I only do it every 2 years, and it still looks good when you get done.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I am going to call time on can I cut it back? That if it is not PJ Fax, if it is not pine, juniper, fir, arborvitae, chemist, spruce, which I've dropped in the chat, assume you can go ahead and cut it back to where you need that plant to be, and trust that a lot of these guys are going to do a lot of growing this year.
That's right.
I do, however, have some questions about spruces and Mugo pine. So Stacy says, if you have a damaged top on a blue spruce, can you cut that off and start a new leader? The top had gotten girdled.
Sure, yeah, yeah, you cut it back and pick which side branch you want to come up, because it will come up if it's the only one. Shorten the others, leave just one that's sticking up further than the rest. And it usually means you have to cut some side branches back too, like I just showed you with the false cypress, because if you've got multiple tips at the same height, they're going to become multiple tops.
They're going to fight to see who
You want to leave just 1.1 higher than the rest of them.
You want to make it obvious that it was the apical.
Go and look at our article on our website. Go to our website and put in search reduce a spruce, and you'll come up with an article that shows all of the details of getting a new top.
Yep. Great. And where'd it go? Where'd it go? Oh, where'd my Mugo? There, Diana. How do you cut back a Mugo pine? It's round.
You cut like you would do a round holly. You're going to have several main branches going off radially from the base, and you cut those branches back, and you cut them back to a side branch. You never leave a brown stub on a Mugo pine, because it's only going to grow from where there are needles and buds now. So if I've got a branch that's got needles on it here, and below it is a brown thing going back to side branches that have needles, I'm cutting this branch off and leaving just the needled side branch up. So you take the main branches and you cut the main branches back. Get anything sticking out further than where you want it to go, you clip them back too. You can also just candle a pine or a spruce or a fir, or when the new growth is coming out and it's soft, you clip that, and then because it's soft and not woody, it'll make buds where you clipped it. But then you make it bushier and bushier at the outside edge, and you start making it darker and darker inside. And it's not a good thing to do on a regular basis.
Some people say to go ahead and cut part of the candles off.
That's candling.
Yeah. But don't cut all the candle off, because on all of the Mugo pine, then you lose that whole year's growth.
Yeah. Well, when we're cutting them to keep them small, we lose the whole year's growth anyway.
I thought you were talking about cutting this is the candle. I thought you were talking about cutting it there, not off.
Yeah, you do. You cut part of the candle off.
Okay.
Sorry, you don't really
ignore us.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. So next we have maybe not so much cutting back, but shrubs that need to be helped along after some rough. For instance, if the deer really put a dent in your arborvitae, like with polys, will they fill in? What can we do with that?
They will fill in if you keep the deer from doing it again. They'll fill in from every place that there's a little bit of green. Little bitty sprouts of green will come back and become whole branches on an arborvitae, but not if you let the deer keep eating them. So if they've been eaten, you can do some clipping of the part that didn't get eaten to even everything up, but then you'd better either spray them or fence them, because they're going to get eaten again, and you're not going to stay ahead of that.
Great. Barbara says, I'm having a problem with leaf spot on my mountain laurel. I pruned back the worst of it. What do you recommend? Should I do a hard pruning since their shape has been compromised by my efforts? Are there treatments? Are there soil additives?
Where you've got fungus problems like leaf spot, on that, or someone was asking about Rudbeckia that has leaf spot on it. You need to change the conditions that cause the leaf spot to happen. The first thing you can do is take out the badly affected stuff, because that will reduce the spore count that's there that can spread to other places. But those fungus spores are able to spread and able to grow because the plant is weak, or it's too moist and sitting in a bad space. You need to change the conditions in order to get it better off. You might have to use a fungicide, which if you can possibly avoid fungicides, even worse than pesticides, stay away from fungicides. But you might have to use something to protect the leaf from getting infected. And there are fungicides that are not as bad as others. Oil, for instance, don't inhale oil either, but using an oil spray like some of the horticultural oils, or a neem oil, or even vegetable oil, if you can get it to break up enough with a bit of soap in it. Oil will protect the leaf from fungus infection during that time of year when it's moist and cool. But the conditions of what got to change. So fungal count, get rid of that stuff, and then try to protect the leaf and change the conditions.
And I'm assuming that would also go for Laura, who's seen black leaf spots on her black-eyed Susan, kind of the same thing to keep an eye on.
Right, the black-eyed Susan is like many of the plants that gets divided. We've got just the one picture, but here's black-eyed Susan that needs to be divided. It's gotten old in the center. And that fungal infection, the septoria leaf spot that black-eyed Susan gets, ends up in the crown as well. So with black-eyed Susan, because it doesn't have leaves, it's got stems and crown that were infected. Divide the black-eyed Susan if it's got bad leaf spot, and take out and keep only the vigorous growing outer pieces that haven't been involved in that infection as much. Take that little piece, swish it around in some bleach water, 10% bleach water, and then put it in a new spot. Put it someplace where there hasn't been that infection, and you might be able to keep that clean. Might.
It's hard with the black-eyed Susan.
That's a tough infection, that one that the black-eyed Susan gets.
Yeah. So Barbara, who was asking about the mountain laurel, would acidifying the soil help?
Probably. If it's not growing in a place where the soil is quite acid on its own right, then a mountain laurel is going to be nutritionally deficient. You might be able to make the soil more acid with an acid-loving plant mulch and fertilizer, like cocoa hulls or coffee grounds, and some,
or at least temporarily.
Right, and one of the acid-providing fertilizers or soil sulfur, and you'd see it green up and become tougher.
Yep. And just to clarify for David, who's asking what's the issue with fungicides, same thing with all the isides. They're vicious poisons. They're chemicals that we don't want them getting into all of the things that we're living in if we don't have to.
Right, and fungicides in particular they can be inhaled so easily and cause such problems to people down the road so easily, not just when they were just
you don't
applied,
even know that you're
but when the residue is there.
Yeah.
Just stay away from fungicides if you possibly can, for your health, for everybody's health.
If you need to use it, let a professional put it.
Yeah, let them gar up in their Tyvek suits and all the rest of it.
Yeah. All right, back to sort of recuperating, rejuvenating. Diane, I have a large expanse of yellow threadleaf false cypress shrubs with a lot of dead area under the top of the branches. Is there any way of rejuvenating these shrubs, or will they need to be replaced?
You on false cypress, you can rejuvenate down to just like arborvitae. I don't have a picture of it. We don't have a picture of it today, because we're actually going to be talking more about the garden, and we're going to get back into edging and weeding here in a minute.
Yeah, great.
But there are little bitty shoots. If you look at the base of a false cypress, most gold false cypress tips hang over like this. If you look back at where it's woody and then go back to a side branch, you'll find at the base of side branches little bits of green, like we showed you on the lavender, and those can grow and become new branches. If those little bits of green are not there, if the plant has shaded itself out to that extent, no, you can't cut it back. But if there's little bits of green there, you can cut it back, and you can do yourself a favor of cutting back some of them one year, let them sprout out, and then cut back the rest later.
It takes time though. A slow growing plant takes time.
Except those false cypresses aren't as slow growing as the Hinokis are.
Usually.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, great. So let's move into the beds themselves. Judith is asking, what do you use to edge your gardens, and what loppers do you recommend?
Okay, thank you. Edging is really important.
Probably the most important.
All weeds begin on the edge. The edge is the first place that we look at after we cut things down and put a fertilizer down. And so we edge the bed, and I like air edges. I like a trenched edge on the bed. It lets me change the shape of the bed. It's the
It gives you
easiest.
flexibility.
Yeah.
It's tougher on the mowers at times, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
If I've got a hard edge where we've put in plastic edging or a wood edging or a stone edging, I'm still going to edge. I'm going to check the soundness of that existing edge, because the edge is where the plant on the outside tries to grow in. And that grass that you see growing there, some of it is annual bluegrass that seeded itself in, but most of it is creeping roots that crept in last fall and sprouted last fall and have since spread further into the inside. They're not come up yet, but they're going further inside. So I edge with a spade to get that trench edge around the garden. I put a spade in, I lean back on the handle to loosen the soil. You're popping the soil. I cut about 10 feet. I reach down, I grab that piece, and I'm not making the bed bigger in this case. I'm just cutting right along that edge where you saw the green. I'm grabbing that green and picking it up, shaking it as I pick it up. If it snaps, if I feel something snap as I'm pulling on it, I take the fork and I loosen, which gives me that piece right there. And I follow that, and it was going that far into the bed. So I'm edging all along the bed. If I've got a hard edge in there, they haven't gone in that far, but there are places where they might have crept over the top or gotten
under
between the seams.
Between.
Yeah, because they can go, that's good lawn grass. That's not
bluegrass. That's not quackgrass. That wasn't.
Went a long way into the bed. And this is that edge after I'm done. You leave it a trench. The air is what stops the roots from growing.
Don't fill it up with the mulch.
Right, you push the soil up into the garden or rake the soil back onto the grass, but don't fill that trench up. And it took a little over an hour to do 100 feet of edge. And the bed ends up weeded 18 inches in because you've chased everything that was running in. And that keeps your bed cleanest. Edging is the most important thing that you can do.
If you do one thing,
yeah,
edge.
And sometimes the things that get in aren't the grass, but in this case, a weed that came from the grass. Can you see the leaves of sheep sorrel, sometimes called sour sorrel? It's a rumex. It was growing in the grass, and it got into the bed and went, whoa, man, I'm going this way, folks. And it's gone a long way into the bed. I'm still doing the same thing. I'm cutting it loose from the colony that it came from, loosening the soil, identifying what it looks like, saying, okay, I know what you are. And early in the year, I can see it because, see, it's a different color than other things. It's purple. I'm chasing it. I'm taking it from the edge, and for wherever it goes, I'm chasing it. It's supposed to be back there at the orange line. That's the edge of the bed. It's come all the way up into the bed. So I'm taking what's attached to where it came in and loosening that and taking it out and chasing it. And I'm getting runners that look like this. See the white sprouts coming on them? Every one of those white sprouts, every one of those nibs is another plant ready to come up. So I'm loosening and pulling the whole thing out. Whatever it is that's gotten in, you have to pay attention to what it is, how it grows, and chase it. And the fork helps me chase it. I've loosened, and you can see the piece that's laying in front of me that I'm chasing into the bed. Then you can weed. After you edge, then you can weed the bed itself. If you do that regularly, if you clean the edge at least once a year, twice a year is probably better, since there are weeds that germinate in the cool weather. If you do that, there's very little weeds in the bed themselves. Let's go back. Okay, what else we got?
All right, that is what's coming on weeding or on edging so far. Although Nancy is curious, how do you keep the mulch out of that beautiful trench? Do you have any tips for that?
No tips for that. Gravity.
I mean, some of it will fall in there. I've seen people, they'll cut the edge and then they'll mulch it, and they'll purposely put mulch right in the edge. Don't do that.
We have a friend who's an extension agent who told people, she said, I know how to make sure that your mower wheel doesn't fall in, just pack it with mulch. I went, no, then the weeds have something to grow back into again. Yeah, it does fall back down in, and then you can either push it back up, or the next time you edge, which is the next, I'll do it twice a year, then we push it back up again. But no, you can't beat gravity. It's going to come back
gravity's going to take it down in water, the flow of it. Just don't pack it.
And the sandier your soil, the more readily it's going to crumble.
Yeah, so Michelle is asking about the edges you take out. Are they safe to throw in a compost bin if you cover with the leaves that are currently in the bin? I've had mixed success with trying to compost sod. It can be a little bit tricky. Using it to smother can be nice if you got a patch to smother, but
yeah, and that's exactly the case. Putting sod in is it's tough to get sod to decompose quickly in a compost. Where I am taking sod, ending up with a bunch of sod, I lay it out. We've got a shady place in our backyard where I lay it out in a single layer and then put newspaper on top of it and mulch on top of it and let it rot back there. But I don't do that. I had a bunch of sod that I took out that had thistle in it. Nope, sorry.
It goes to
Not made.
compost.
Yeah, that's going to go to a hot compost in order to get
Off
burned
our
right
site.
Yeah, we're going to send that off site and let them chip it up and turn it with their end loaders at the municipal composting sites.
Great. So I haven't gotten anything else about edging and not too much about weeding, but Gretchen, back to our conversation about the leaves in the garden. Gretchen says, I put leaves on my perennial beds and now my husband is wanting to tidy things up. When, if ever, should I tidy it all?
If you have somebody who also enjoys the garden, who wants to tidy it up, let them tidy it up. Or go out there and put some mulch on top of it and make it look tidy. We call it a veneer mulch.
Yep.
You put just a little bit of mulch on top to make everything the same color. In 3 weeks, the plants are going to cover it and nobody's going to see it. So you might need just that temporary fix. But if they want to take them off so badly, let them take them off, go compost them. At least they've done their job of protecting the soil, of rotting at the base where they were touching the soil. So they've done some good. And now you're just going to have to put mulch in their place and make it look tidier. Such is the way it goes. Jocelyn does say that her Zoom died out and she didn't know how much of an airspace for the edge, any kind of airspace. If the soil is sandy soil and I know that the edge is going to fall back in on itself, I'm going to cut a wider trench and push the soil further back into the bed. If it's a clay soil that tends to hold itself better, I don't have as much, but any amount of air is going to stop roots from growing. So it doesn't really matter. And some edges we cut really deep. We have gardens, the garden that we showed second had a lot of weed grass in the grass, and I'm going to cut that edge deeper and push it further back because those roots run deeper. And you'll know that when you edge, how deep the roots are running is how deep you need to want the edge to be open.
And if you have the real deep runners, you might have to go ahead and put in a solid edge like a carpet runner or something to keep it out.
Yeah. Diane wants to know, since weeds grow into an open space, do I keep weeding that edge? No. And weeds don't grow all that rapidly. And yeah, you'll get some weed seedlings, and that's your weeds are on the edge. Some weed seedlings will start in there, but I don't weed continuously. Just the next fall, I'm going to clean the edge up again. But I don't weed continuously, not on that edge. There's too much other stuff to do.
Yeah. And it is true that maybe you might need a deep, like you guys would be surprised at how deep Janet's trench is, that it's not just a little divot. So if you can deepen that trench, that is also helpful. All right, we've got some weed questions. The help. Julie, have you had success dealing with Canadian thistle? Let it grow and then cut back before setting seed. There are larger patches that she would like to convert to garden.
Canada thistle is one of the worst weeds, and the field south thistle. There's south thistle that's annual and there's south thistle that's perennial, like Sonia has. Poor thing. I'm going to share a bit of a movie that I think worked earlier. Those of you who were here first off, you already saw this. Steve and I are going to made this movie earlier to show you what's going on. Take a look at how thistle grows.
Go.
So it's thistle in front of my fork.
I'm going to get a lot more of that thistle out of there and set the plant back a lot further than if I just take the top off. We have made a squirrel very angry.
Yeah.
Oh, and bonus, I'm going to get a second one that wasn't all the way up yet.
I've bounced that fork. At first, when I pulled the fork, the soil moved and the thistle didn't. I had to put the fork in deep enough to make the thistle come up to know that I was getting the whole base.
There we go. See what I missed last year? When I was taking out another one, I left.
So when I was weeding, so I weeded out thistle, and we do this at Sonia's garden where the sow thistle comes in from the neighbor regularly, knowing that thistle runs on a running root, like that sorrel that I showed you earlier. It's a running root. I need to get that running root. And here's where I severed the root on each side as I was digging the thistle out. So you dig the thistle out and then you go look for survivors that are trying to come back up. And you know that you're not trying to get the vertical root. They are not a tap-rooted plant. If I just pull and get this part, this is going to grow back. I need to go deeper with the fork, loosen enough to get out the runner at the bottom. The older the infestation is on Canada thistle, the more layers of this there may be. There may be deeper layers.
4 layers.
The more that you do this to the thistle, the more that you bring the runners up closer to the surface because they're weaker. So you have to keep at thistle in order to have this happen. Poor Sonia has to keep at thistle forever, especially along the edge with May's yard, because it's underneath May's grass and lawn, and it keeps coming back in from there. I think that was showing for people. I'm going to stop that share and go back.
And Gina's asking, is mugwort dealt with like thistle?
Yes, although mugwort runs at a much shallower level, almost on the surface. Mugwort is, some people think mugwort is mums. They say, oh, I got these mums that keep coming into my garden because the foliage looks like mums and it spreads along the ground like that. But yeah, mugwort is a runner, but it's much more shallow.
Great. All right, Julie, help. My neighbor's English ivy is now in my bed, going right through the Forsythia and Weigelia. I can't dig because of my back.
That's English ivy is a very tough plant. I have it in clients' gardens where it's coming from the neighbor. And once a year, I have to crawl along the lot line, cut the ivy tendrils that have come forward and pull them up toward my yard, toward my garden that I'm taking care of, in order to take them out of the soil where they've rooted. And it's not fun to do. And if you've got a sore back, I think that you may have to say, I'm just going to, wherever it is that I can reach it, where I can see it, maybe you're going to use a herbicide like Roundup. And it's another one of the ones that I wish we didn't even have. I wish it didn't exist, but spritz the edge as it comes forward to keep it killed back. You have to like establish a line and say, here's as far as I can let you come forward. And that may be the edge of the front edge of the Forsythia crown, and use the Roundup when you can in the early spring before other stuff is leafed out. Otherwise I can't help you with that. Those evergreen ground covers are tough critters.
Especially if they're happy and moving.
And just to reiterate, bindweed, yes, like this'll, chase it down, chase every little bit of it, be vigilant, kill it with fire if you can.
Yes,
don't use fire, sorry.
And bindweed is one of the reasons that the current newsletter is slow going out, because I ran into bindweed as a paragraph of what to say. We have never beaten bindweed. We have beaten bindweed back to where it came from, and then identified that spot and kept it at that spot. But we have never beaten it, because the field bindweed and the great bindweed, the native bindweeds, have a storage root that's so deep that you can't get all the way down to that root. Sometimes it can be 4 or 5 feet deep, that root that's providing the starch that keeps coming back up. So with bindweed, yes, you take all the runners that you can out and keep chasing it back. You'll find the spot that it's coming from. You'll find the one spot that everybody is coming from if you chase those runners. And then once you identify that spot, every month you go to that spot and go, there you are, you're trying to come up again, and you take out the piece that's coming back up.
We've gone from having
solid cover.
7 feet of bindweed to where maybe 7 pieces might come up now.
In one case,
it's hard to describe. It was just so much.
In one case, it was solid ground cover. It was on the ground everywhere. It was in all the bushes. We got it back to where it's coming from under the lawn. We're not going to get it out unless we kill all the lawn for years at a time. But we have found 2 places at the edge of the bed where here's where it's coming in. And so every year we can go there twice and take it back from that area. But we've never beaten bindweed all the way. So good luck, anybody.
We're still working on it, though.
Yeah, maybe someday. We've got some time left.
Yeah. We've also got a question from Carol, plagued by a cress-like weed in all beds behind evergreens and shrubs, edges of lawn, Any idea about what that? And then Mary Lou says hairy bittercress and how to get rid of it. Would these be the same or no?
Yeah, they're probably, you're looking at, when you're looking at the cresses, you're looking at members of the mustard family, all of which are cool season weeds, which means they germinate in the cool weather in the fall, and they're already blooming now, and more of them are germinating now in the cool weather that are going to bloom at the end of spring. And the way to get rid of the cresses is to weed in the fall. We did take some pictures of doing this, and we didn't get a newsletter out to you guys to say in the fall, get those guys in the fall, scrape them off, put paper and mulch on top of them, get them in the fall when they first germinate. And it's in the late fall. It's after most of us have decided that we're done for the year. Putting pre-emergent, if you use pre-emergent weed control, it's another one of the herbicides that we stay away from those things. But you can use a pre-emergent, or you can use mulch as a pre-emergent. You can use paper on top of them to smother them. You can haul them off, but you need to get them in their cool season. If you wait until now, you're working on an established colony that's already seeding itself around. And some years they're terrible. What happens is the seed blows around. Sometimes I think like radium weed, Sonia, we were both crying about radium weed over the last 2 years. I'm not seeing a single radium weed anywhere this year. I think sometimes that those seeds blow in on high air currents, just like the dust that came all the way from the Sahara into the Gulf Coast states a couple of years ago. So sometimes you just get an incursion of the weed and you need to step on it before it becomes an every year occurrence. So
we've got some other coming in. Garlic. Joy, any suggestions for how to deal with a neighbor whose whole lawn is Egyptian garlic? Jane says, any help for wild onion garlic?
The bulb weeds are some of the worst ones to deal with. Just like that's Canada thistle on the left, and it's nutsedge here. Nutsedge is also a bulb type plant, like the wild onion is. And because you can kill the top, but still leave the bulb in, which has enough energy now to sprout again, but look like grass, and you don't notice it for later in the year. It keeps coming back year by year. The only way we've gotten rid of bulb plants is to dig them. We know they're there. Even before these have reached the surface, we know there's nutsedge in that area. We know they're in there. We know what the nuts look like. So we're loosening and taking out all the nuts we can find. On the alliums, and we've been fighting wild onion in a client's garden for, this is our 4th year. We dig it when we see it in the spring. We watch for them to come back again in the summertime. We dig it again, and we've got less every year. But it's an uphill battle because they're established in the lawns. They're established in a neighbor's ground cover area. So we just keep fighting them. There's always the option of moving, just picking up and moving to a spot where, although we did that, we moved. We didn't move out of a garden we didn't like, but we did move. And I thought, well, the one good thing is I get to start a new garden. I said, let's get a place with no landscape so we can start new. Instead, we got a place that was full of every weed.
Had the 10 worst weed list. Was here.
It took us 3 years to get the beds cleaned of Houtinia, bishop's weed, bindweed, Canada thistle, Johnson grass, and also oh no, I forgot the other one. Anyway, lots of weeds.
So and just to clarify that for those like Donna and Jean who are asking about Star of Bethlehem, that's the same principle.
It is. In Star of Bethlehem, because the leaves when they come up can look like a crocus leaf, you're going to have to sacrifice your crocus. You can easily tell the difference between a crocus bulb and a Star of Bethlehem bulb. The Star of Bethlehem bulbs are elongated, they're smooth, they don't have a brown cover on them. The crocuses are squashed, flattened, brown covered bulbs. Dig up and take out all the bulbs you can find, and be aware. I was digging out, that's it, Star of Bethlehem was the other one. I was digging out Star of Bethlehem last week, and Steve came by. He said, what are you doing? I said, stay away from me. I'm digging Star of Bethlehem, and I am not a happy person when I dig it, because I'm having to lose a lot of soil because I am not shaking those little tiny side bulbs are going to fall off. And that means I'm sacrificing that soil that I've dug up.
Yeah. We've got some questions. Matt and Barb, how do I get rid of bishop's weed? And Tina, can I smother bishop's weed? And then we have some questions about smothering after that.
You can smother bishop's weed, but it takes more than a season to smother it. Don't let the smothered cover rot and go away and turn your head, because then it'll get reestablished again. I'm gonna ask you to wait for the newsletter that's gonna be out in just a couple of days. We've got whole pictures of taking out bishop's weed. Like doing any of these other weeds, Tim's working with us here on scouring rush, another running root weed that pops up.
That's one root that he chased and followed.
Yeah. With bishop's weed, which is also a running root, we take the bed and we slice it into sections, and we chase every piece of root out, and then we keep that bed clear or fallow while we keep coming back and checking for it. Any plants we take out that we absolutely need to keep, we take all the way down to the smallest bare root that we can take and identify that there is absolutely no root of weed in it, and we set them in another bed.
And that scouring rush root is so hard to find.
Yeah, it's quite the dirt colored root, and can be difficult to find.
Snaps real easy too.
But we won't give you all those details because they're in the newsletter that we're
great.
Just getting ready.
And then, so if you do go the smothering route, and both Colleen and my apologies, I forgot who else was asking about if you want to smother around a tree root. So if you smother weeds beneath a tree, do the newspaper and mulch endanger the tree roots?
No, the newspaper and mulch don't endanger the tree roots. Whose yard was I in? Oh, April's yard. Our person who cuts our hair. Some year we'll get our hair cut again.
Soon.
She was saying, well, there was a sucker coming up near her hydrangea. She said, well, what's that from? I said, I looked around. I said, the neighbor's calorie pear. She said, from over there. I said, yeah. The calorie pear is 30 feet tall, but it has feeder roots 60 feet away. You're not with paper right around the base of a tree denying that tree.
Just don't put it up on.
Don't put it up against the trunk, and be aware that that's a place where the paper meets the trunk. But there's a little bit of light there, and you're gonna have to patrol that area for any weeds that try to sprout up there, because gasp, here's the only place I can get up.
I also wouldn't cover if the flares are visible. I wouldn't necessarily cover those with the paper and that, but that's up to you.
Yeah,
it will handle it.
Okay.
Okay, so we have two quick questions about mulch, and then we're going to move on to fertilizing because we're getting some fertilizer questions in. Does that sound good?
Yes, that sounds good, because we need to get fertilizer out of the way.
Great. So quickly, Rose is asking if I put seed for new perennials out in new beds, can I mulch over those areas, or will I just smother the seeds? I don't see any seedlings yet.
Do not cover up where you put seedlings.
No.
We put seedlings in a given area. We've got several areas in our yard where we have seed planted. An anaphyllus, a pearly everlasting that took us a long time to find, and Steve's got the seed. That area I marked with twigs with little X's. I stuck twigs in the ground with X's that say that this area right here, leave it clear. It means that I'm going to have to patrol that area and watch for seedlings of other things coming up, but no, don't cover up your seeds.
Great. And then Jay Novak says, I have been told Sakura compost has thistle in it, true or not? It's going to vary, I assume.
Compost can have weeds in it.
Any of them.
If let's say they're composting on top of soil, BFI's place, their Arbor Hills location, they compost on concrete slabs. So it's not going to happen there. What can happen in a place like one of Sakura's places, they compost on soil. So now they've got the compost made, and they're using end loaders to pick it up and dump it into trucks and take it to their distribution points. If that end loader is at the edge of the pile and scraping soil as well as compost, you're going to have whatever.
So it's not necessarily the compost that might be the problem.
Yeah, but if it's compost that came from Sakura, which is our southeast Oakland County Resource Recycling Authority, they're making good compost. It's not compost until they've rotted everything and heated everything up in it. So in their compost itself, I think it's very unlikely you've got thistle. If that compost gets stacked up someplace on top of soil with weeds in it, the weeds are going to grow into the compost and grow at great rate into the compost. So it can end up to you with thistle roots in it.
That's how it's stored.
Well, let's talk about fertilizer.
Okay.
Because
let's talk about fertilizer. We got questions about best fertilizer, preferred fertilizers, organic by name, milorganite. So let's do fertilizer.
You'll look at our list and you'll see that for fertilizer is number 4. It's cut things down, cut your woodies down, cut the perennial herbaceous stuff down, rake out your debris just so you can see. You're not trying to bare the ground. Then you're going to spread fertilizer at that point, because if you spread the fertilizer, then you don't have to scratch it in. You don't have to do anything special.
Because you're still going to do the edging and the weeding.
Yep, and it's going to end up getting mixed in. So do that before you do your edging and weeding. And we use slow release fertilizer. And in this case where I'm working right there, I'm using Osmocote or Once. It's not a slow release fertilizer, except that it's a coated capsule like time release medicines that's going to break down in warmth and moisture. But I'm using something slow release so that I won't burn the plants, and so that I don't have to worry so much about how much I'm putting on in one particular square foot. But I prefer to use the slow release fertilizers. We just this week at our library garden volunteer group, we used Hollytone to get us a little bit of acid loving plant help in the soil. And it's made of feather meal, poultry meal, bone meal. It's made of organic substances that have to break down when the soil is active with microbes in it. As the microbes work, they break down the organic matter and they release nutrients to the plants, and they also provide carbon to the soil. So I'm helping the soil as well as the plants. So these are all slow release: bone meal, ironite, kelp meal, green sand. The Hollytone is mixed up for you already. It's a complete fertilizer with all of the 3 nutrients that are the major nutrients plants need. These others, you have to kind of work out what you're using. Now this one, water soluble, is not slow release. It melts in water. And this is the one that you want to watch out for. This time of year, you can lose it all. You get a cold spell like we've had this week in our area, and rain, and you can wash that all out of your soil. And it never helped the soil. It was only nutrients for the plants. And when they're gone and mixed and washed out, they're gone.
It's the soil you want to help.
Yeah. So we're spreading that on the ground. So here's our Hollytone getting spread. And I'm not worried that it's on the leaves. It's just like an insect pooped on the leaves. Thank you. It's not really going to hurt the leaves. It's not going to melt. It's not going to burn the leaf surface. And I'm putting it on. See the rate there? I'm spreading it on top of the mulch. I haven't weeded yet. There's still weeds in there. It's going to end up getting mixed in as I work my way through the bed. And there's help for you in on our website. This is one of our newsletters that's in the PDF form, What's Up number 34. So you download the PDF and you read it. It's how to test your soil to learn what type of fertilizer you need. This soil test said that we need 3 pounds of nitrogen, almost 2 pounds of phosphorus, and 3.5 pounds of potassium, which means that we are looking for a fertilizer that says on the label 3, 2, 3, or 4. It tells us which fertilizer is going to be best for our soil.
For what we're trying to grow.
If I don't have a fertilizer test, a soil test, then I'm just going to use a fertilizer that has all 3 nutrients, hopefully balanced: 3, 3, 3, 4, 4, 4, 2, 2, 2. And I'm going to put that fertilizer on when I see plant growth. When plants are growing, they can use fertilizer. When they are not growing, they can't use fertilizer.
No, if they're not growing, it's
so slow release I can put on in the fall, knowing that the soil is not warm enough for it to do anything, and know that that fertilizer is going to be there for those plants as they start growing. And as they start growing in the spring, I can put slow release fertilizer on, knowing that the second flush of growth is going to get supported. Lawns should really not be fertilized until you start seeing them growing. They're just starting to grow now. Anything earlier than this is a waste of money and a waste of fertilizer. It's just going into the groundwater. In our newsletter that you can find, if you search buying fertilizer or fertilizer chart, you'll get this article that's coverage and cost of fertilizers that lets you download our chart. This chart that has our fertilizers we like to use: Dr. Earth 555, where's my Holly garden tome 344, that says a 4-pound package of 344 is going to cover 30 square feet of annual flowers or vegetables, 60 square feet of perennials. And we've left you places where you can put in your name of the fertilizer, how many pounds, what its numbers are, 444, and these numbers will pop up then and tell you how much it will cover. So here's some fertilizers that we recommend. And in the case that we have that if you want to use them, how much they're going to cover. I hope that helps you out with fertilizer, because that's our best choice. We call it fertilizer phobia.
Yeah.
Gardeners have, and that's our
They
help
do.
for fertilizer phobia.
Fertilizer.
And we are 1 minute away from time. So only if there is a pressing question will we take that. We need you to get out. We're going to shorten these things from now on out. We're going for an hour. And then this last half hour could be just our messing around and talking and stuff. But we've been keeping you guys too long. We can do this in less time. So let's.
So we've got some questions about fertilizer, but I don't think that any of them are urgent. I think a lot of them can be dealt with by looking at Garden A to Z, by looking at the handout. But there is a question I think is good to end us on with that last minute. Amy, I feel exhausted thinking about getting out and dealing with all of this. But just thinking about how important it is that you do what you can as you can do it, and that's what matters. It's always just one day at a time. Try not to feel overwhelmed. And if Jen and Steve, you have recommendations about that, that might be a good way to end.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. Do something, and do something that's on the top of our list. Do those, because those things save you the most and do the most for the garden. Start with cutting things back out of the way. It does a great deal for your psyche.
It really does. To get that brown out of there.
Yep.
That now that it's greening up, that brown we've watched it all winter. It's time for it to go.
Yeah, and so you get that out of the way. It makes you feel better. You edge the garden. It keeps your weeds down. Do them in that order, because I feel the same way. You might not think that. You might think, oh, Shell, I go out and I'm sometimes near tears as I get to a garden. Oh, God, what do I do from here on? Just start doing something. The doing makes you feel better. The doing increases the endorphins in your brain. Being out with plants changes your alpha waves. You start getting more creative. Just go out and do something. And if you've got help, now is the time. We've told you that in Simplifying the Garden. Get someone to help you in April. Call somebody up who always said, gee, I'd like to give you something. Give me help. Come out, follow me with a wheelbarrow and a rake and just clean things up. Give me somebody to talk to now and then about
somebody
what I'm
to pick up the stuff you throw out so you don't have to do it. You can sit and talk while you're working.
Right.
And they're not working hard doing that.
And even if they bag it up and you weren't going to bag it up, don't worry about
That's
it. Let it go. Anemonella is that one, Steve. Anemonella.
Okay.
So thank you very much for being with us. Join us if you could into the new season, because we'd really like to continue to do these as long as we can do these. Next week, we'll be doing transplant. We're moving more into design and how you can think about making the perfect garden, designing that perfect garden out of that space you've got. If you are a renewing subscriber, it's $150 for 48 webinars, and there'll be 105 recordings in the library that you can get forever. If you are a new subscriber, it's $240. If you are joining us just for today and you know a subscriber, get their name, give us their name. We'll still extend the friends discount to you. And
we're also friends.
That's right. Somebody realized that we're their friends and said, well, we're your friend. We've been around for a while, but support us. We would like to keep doing this. It does take us time to put these together, and we really appreciate the help that you give us doing that. So join us next week, and we'll enjoy our time in the garden, knowing that you're out there being productive in yours. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take care, everyone. I hope to see everyone again soon. And it's not always as manic as this in the chat. Just so you know, today was slightly unusual for those who are new. Normally, there's a lot more individual kind of pauses and attention.
Yes,
yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to let the questions drive the show today.
It was a different show than normal.
I love it. I love it. Thank you very much.
Enjoy the garden, everyone.
Bye now.